Oh, we're streaming now. And looking particularly this morning at sort of the end of Joseph's life, the end of Jacob's life, and sort of that interplay between him and his son and ultimately his grandsons. So I thought we'd get right to the text. Here we go. All right. Everybody can see here. Okay. We'll dispense with the Hebrew for the moment, but anybody want to like jump in here and just read this little bit here from
I'd love to.
Go for it, Nona.
Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, and as though he was the younger, and left on Manasseh's head, thrust crossing his hands. Although Manasseh was the firstborn, and he blessed Joseph, saying, "The God whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel has redeemed me from all harm. Bless the lad, and then may my name be recalled, and many of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teemingly multiplied upon the earth." When Joseph saw his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was wrong, so he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. "Not so, father," Joseph said to his father, "for the other is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father objected, saying, "I know, my son, I know. You too shall become a people, too shall be great. Yet his younger brothers shall be greater than he, and his brother and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for nations." So he blessed them that day, saying, "By you shall Israel invoke blessing, saying, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh.
Thank you. All right.
Who else I could do that?
Right. Thank you. All right. So just to play out the scene, right? Jacob is on his deathbed, more or less. And Jacob brings his two boys, the two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, into the room so that their grandfather Jacob can bestow some blessings upon them. And if we imagine the scene that Jacob is sort of old and senile and going blind and whatnot, so to help, Joseph takes Ephraim and kind of moves him to Jacob's left side near his left hand, and he moves Manasseh over toward Jacob's right hand, so that Jacob will use his right hand for Manasseh, his left hand for Ephraim, right, giving the sort of the favor to the older, not to the younger, which is was customary. But what does Jacob do, right? Despite Manasseh being on the right and Ephraim being on the left, Jacob reaches out like this, right? And places his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh, giving the, primary blessing, shall we say, to the younger, not to Ephraim, not to Manasseh, right? Sort of, in a way, elevating, as the text says at the end, elevating Ephraim over Manasseh. What do people make of this? Is this just Cindy? Go ahead.
Well, this is what happened with Jacob. He was the younger, and he got the blessing, although it was through trickery by his mother and with his help. But it's just a replay of the younger son getting the blessing.
Okay. There are definitely people who think that, or some scholars who would suggest that this is, in a way, him trying to cosmically rectify his own theft, as it were, of birthright by sort of rebalancing the scale between older and younger. But that doesn't necessarily hold water for everyone. Anybody else? What do you make of this? Let's scroll through. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
I have a clarification
Please.
question. With Manasseh and Ephraim, are the two names that are given as a blessing on Shabbat?
Yes, we're going to get there in a second.
Oh, okay.
Great question. We're going to get there in a second.
How
Right,
old were they?
This blessing at the very end, we can get there now, actually. So this blessing at the very end of the text, where it says that, right, Jacob says to the boys, right, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, putting Ephraim before Manasseh, that those words are the words of blessing that parents traditionally share and invoke over their children on Friday evening as a part of Shabbat blessings, right? And you see it here, right? That traditionally to a boy, you say, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. To a girl, you say, may God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah.
But why are those two boys selected for that blessing? Is my question.
Oh, that's a great question.
I thought I heard that they didn't have a conflict with each other. Is that correct?
Yeah, I see Penina. I'm gonna jump in. I see Penina like nodding and raising her, so I'll let you jump in, Penina.
And how about the age? What are the ages of the boys?
That is a fantastic question that I don't have an answer to, Karen.
I'll ask you today.
Go ahead, Penina.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, at one point, the crossing of the hands actually at one point are together. So, and Joseph himself did the same thing. He crossed his hands like this over and put them over his father. In other words, when they cross it like this, it's supposed to go, the blessing went both ways on both of them. Because at the point of crossing the hands touch together. It become one. So the fact is that we're picking both of them for the blessing on Shabbat. It's because the blessing went equally to both of them. And Joseph kind of like agreed with it because he did the same and put his hands the same way on the top of his father. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it's funny. Penina,
they became together one.
Penina, that makes me think of and remember going back to the episode of Joseph, tricking his father with his mother's help into the birthright blessing, tricking Esau out of it. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, beautiful teaching about that vignette, sort of saying, poor Jacob, who thinks there's only one blessing, right? Poor Jacob, who thinks that he has to take his brother's blessing because there isn't a blessing for him too. And that, without getting into the weeds, that Rabbi Sachs goes and shows that actually there were two blessings. They were different. And Jacob got the blessing.
They went to both of them.
Correct. Jacob got the blessing for Jacob. Esau got the blessing for Esau. They weren't the same. And this idea that there's more than enough blessing to go around.
Exactly.
Right. It's like love, right? It's not a finite amount of blessing.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So, right. But you also evoke, right, this notion that Joseph is worried that his father is senile, right? Because his father, crosses his hands, and then Joseph says, no, Dad, here. And then he says, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. Like,
exactly.
This is what I mean to do.
Exactly.
Donna.
I have a question about the switcheroo.
Yeah.
About changing things up. And maybe I'll meet with you privately and have some questions for you. But about this, it's so interesting how things get changed up, but God never does allow those who are supposed to inherit something, it's been written down by Jewish law, they get their dowry or they get their inheritance, right?
Sorry, repeat the question. I'm not sure I quite followed.
They get there's a switcheroo here with the Esau and Jacob and the woolly hair and pretending to be the firstborn when he wasn't. So I have experience with that, but I don't want to go into that. But back with
look, I think look, this is not quite about inheritance, right? In the same way that Jacob and Esau pieces, you know, but it does still have that dynamic of older, you know, and younger, and sort of the primacy of the older over the younger, that that, you know, Jacob here is turning on its head, really.
Yeah. And Jacob says to him, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, Brad.
And that's what I like, because it's more of an equalizer, and it shows that-
Exactly.
Well, exactly, right. So that's sort of, I think, you know, I've always thought is sort of what Jacob's trying to do here, is sort of balance things in a way.
and
Brad,
if we're to,
Brad, I see your hand.
Yeah, I too am interested in this relationship between Jacob and Joseph. Joseph, who attempts to correct his father, and his father, despite the fact that Joseph is of such an elevated status in Egypt at that point. I mean, he's second to Pharaoh. Despite that, Jacob is not going to be pushed around by his son.
Yep.
And he's going to assert himself despite the obvious imbalance between their respective statuses. I mean, what is that telling us about these two personalities?
Well, probably a lot. I'm smiling because as you were saying that, Brad, I'm just thinking about the dynamic that, you know, many of us have probably seen or been through, but that I see more often than not, you know, between aging parents and their adult children. And in terms of, you know, who gets to make the decisions and who gets to decide what's best, and no, dad, this is what's best for you, but I don't want that, you know, I don't want this. And so in some ways I think that, you know, nothing's changed, right? We still have these kind of you know, scenarios in which aging folks say, no, look, I still get to decide here. I still have my faculties. This is what's right. This is what I want. I don't care if you think the will should say this. This is what it's going to say. Or I don't care if you think I should be on assisted living. I'm not. I'm fine. I'm staying here. I mean, right? We, you know, we could make a long list, I'm sure, right? In our
I like to reduce it to respect.
Right,
In other words,
right.
the father is not that old where he is senile. His
Correct.
son should give him the respect of what he wishes to do and show actually how equal he is in his treatment of his children, no matter the accord that this son has been given by the community within a family. He is showing the decency, and the father is showing his maturity and his place as the head of the family.
Right.
I think it's rather beautiful and can be taken, you know, we can develop this. And
yeah, look, I think, right. I think to that point, Karen, the head of the family, the patriarch, that's certainly there, right? Because presumably this isn't just Joseph bringing the boys, you know, for a Sunday afternoon visit with grandpa. This is grandpa's the patriarch. He has a blessing to give before he dies. Like that's what this is about. So that in and of itself, I think, recognizes Jacob's stature, however you want to say it, right? Sure. As the patriarch in the family. Brad.
Is this a bit out of character for Joseph, who has been pretty egotistical and pretty, I don't know what the word is, the way he's handled his family has shown a great deal of control, put it that way. And is this out of character for him to defer this way to his father at this point?
What others think? Yeah, Panina shaking your head. I have my own opinions, which I'll share in a minute, but go ahead, Panina.
There is no way that we can tell what these people felt and how they thought, right?
Right.
Okay, we can only see by the result. The result were that both of them got the blessing. The result of them were that Jacob did not change his hands. He kept them like this, and Joseph did it over him again. The idea is, what you look at the result, they were both blessed. They both got the same amount of blessing. What Joseph felt and what Joseph thought, or what Jacob thought, or what Jacob, we don't know. We're looking at the results. This is it. That's it.
Oh, and
Go ahead, Susan.
I don't think this is, I would disagree with that. I don't think, yes, Joseph was arrogant as a youth, but I think the whole story is of Joseph's maturation. And,
Okay.
And coming to realize, what he had did, and he attained some humility as well. And the reconciliation that he had with his brothers, I think shows that, after what all that they did to him, for goodness sakes, I think that's the story of Joseph, that he could, that he grew, he matured, he became a better person. And I think the deference to the father is quite understandable. It's, as others have said, it's in the family. He's not acting as the vizier, the advisor to the Pharaoh. That was political. This is familial, and
he has certainly grown and matured, right?
We can identify, definitely.
Right, Esau forgives him. He forgives his brothers. But I could make the case that, to me, he's always had a decent relationship with his father, and always had respect and reverence even for his father, right? He was Jacob's favorite, right? He got the code. Jacob was crestfallen and heartbroken when he thought that Joseph had died, right? So to me, it doesn't seem out of character for Joseph to approach the relationship with his father with this kind of reverence. But I agree, his ego and his high opinion of himself in his other relationships stands in contrast to this. All right, before we move on, I think I saw one more hand. Let me just look here.
I would go
Go ahead, Donna.
I was just going to say, this is such an amazing love story of the analogy of Adonai and Israel, and people that bully people when they make fun of their dreams, and they all made fun of Joseph and his dreams, and they were jealous. And then when people that bully people, but in the end, forgiveness and compassion, and everybody comes together, and God brings Israel into Egypt, and then how everything works, that we go to Mount Sinai. It's just an amazing story.
Let's push on a little bit further here. We did this blessing. Okay, so here's just a lovely, very contemporary take by Rabbi Laura Geller, who some of us may know, the Rabbi Emerita at Temple Emmanuel in Beverly Hills. I'll just read it briefly. Rabbi Geller says, maybe we can understand Jacob's blessing of his grandchildren this way. Ephraim, may God help you become the best Ephraim can be. Manasseh, may God help you become the best Manasseh can be. Maybe we should fill in the names of our own children as we bless them. So I would say to my daughter, Ilana, may you be fully Ilana. And to my son, I would say, Joshua, may you be fully Joshua. Or in the words of the modern Jewish poet Marcia Falk, be who you are, and may you be blessed in all that you are.
I like it.
Right?
I love it.
Right? Because I think that, taking out of it for a second, the modern sense that, well, we use this as a blessing for our children, right? Like,
yeah, but I wouldn't.
I literally was just downstairs with the nursery school and my son Simon, and we do this blessing at the end. The teachers do it, and parents who are there with their children. So I picked him up and we did it, right? I said, God inspired you to be like Ephraim and Manasseh. If I actually stop and think about it, do I want Simon to be like Ephraim and Manasseh, or do I want him to be like Simon? I never met Ephraim and Manasseh. I don't really know, if
Come on,
I want him to be like them. I want him to be like him. I want him to be the best, to Rabbi Geller's point, the best him that he can be. But I think where she's going with this is that's what, in essence, Jacob was really trying to say to them, is be you.
I think that we have to allow our children and grandchildren to be who they are. And where we've got two grandchildren who are amazing, but in totally different directions. And to see them support one another in their own directions that's what this prayer has always meant to me. That we have to support them, but let them be who they are.
Is that easier with grandchildren than children?
Could be.
My daughter was an only child, which she regrets. I don't think it's ever easier. I think it's a matter of teaching them that they're both wonderful and they have a lot of talent, and we have to accept where their talents are going. And they have to learn to accept each other as where their talents are going. I think that makes a huge difference.
Okay. When you write a great paper, you could still have to put down bibliography on the bottom. So what we're doing with the Bible, this is exactly that. We're learning all we can, but we still putting the name of Manasseh and Ephraim. It's kind of like the bibliography. It's where we learn the lesson from. That's about it. So I wouldn't take it out.
That's beautiful. I love that. I'm going to push us a little further here to another dimension to this scene, right? So we're still in this,
one question
deathbed-ish sort of scene. Jacob, Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh. And we go a little further in the text, and Jacob calls to his sons, "Come together that I can tell you what is to befall you in the days to come." Right? "Assemble and hearken, O sons of Jacob, hearken to your Israel, your father." Right? Jacob's like saying, like, okay, this is it. Like, I'm on my way out. Let me tell you, let me prophesize what's going to happen. Right? So anybody want to read this little piece of it's not too long, little piece of Talmud?
I just read something online from Rabbi Sachs that was from that prior thing. Jacob Sachs distinguishes between prediction and prophecy. That prior one is not a prediction of what will happen. He said that's not prophets' roles. It's a prophecy. If all prophets do, if you do this, with, let's say, a bad thing, then these bad things can happen. And if you act in this way, in a good way, then this should happen. So that's what he was, and I thought that was quite profound and good. It was precisely that statement you just brought up, that Jacobs is not predicting, although they didn't say predicting. Sorry.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody want to read this little bit of Talmud? If not,
Here, go ahead. I will.
Go ahead. Thanks.
Our rabbis taught, how did they wrap up the Shema? They recited, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And they did not make a pause. This is Rabbi Meir's view. Rabbi Judah said they did make a pause, but they did not recite, "Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever." And what is the reason that we recite it?
Let me stop you right there for a second, just to put it in the Hebrew, because this is one of those rare situations in which the Hebrew might actually be more helpful than the English, right? What they're asking is, right, they say, "Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad," right? Why do we say, "Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed"? Because that is not in the text, right? In the Torah, it says, "Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad." Okay, right? We insert this Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Blessed be, God's name forever and ever, right? So, what is the reason we recite it? You can pick up right there.
And what is the reason we do recite it? Even as Rabbi Simon ben Lakish expounded, or Rabbi Simon ben Lakish said, "And Jacob called in unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the end of days. Jacob wished to reveal to his sons the end of days, whereupon the Shekinah departed from him, said he, perhaps heaven forend?
Offend.
Okay.
Couldn't happen.
Oh, okay.
Couldn't
There
happen.
is one unfit among my children like Abraham, from whom there issued Ishmael, or like my father Isaac, from whom there issued Esau. But his sons answered him, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Just as there is only one in thy heart, so is there in our heart only one. In that moment, our father Jacob opened his mouth and exclaimed, Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. Said the rabbis, How shall we act? Shall we recite it? But our teacher Moses did not say it. Shall we not say it? But Jacob said it. Hence they enacted that it should be recited quietly.
Okay, so just to put it in, just to paraphrase, right? So the rabbis are imagining, right, that here's this scene, Jacob's about to die, and he's concerned that maybe one of his children's not gonna, uphold Judaism, right? Not gonna be faithful to, the one true God. And they say to him, basically, Dad, don't worry, right? Shema Yisrael, not Yisrael, the people, Yisrael, Jacob. Listen, Jacob, Dad, God is God. There's just God. We're good. We get it, right? And in his relief, Jacob responds, thank God, Baruch Hashem, right? Baruch Hashem Kavod, right? Malchut Olam Vayed, right? And then, which begs the rabbis to ask, okay, well, when they say Moses didn't say it, they mean it's not in the Torah is what they mean, right? And they say, well, but Jacob did say it. And so that's the compromise where if you're we sort of do it here, but really if you're in a traditional shul, the Baruch Shem Kavod line of the Shema is whispered, not said aloud, with the exception of Yom Kippur, is whispered because it's, not really there. Is sort of the rationale given for why it's whispered here, right? So that's why they say that it should be recited quietly. Okay, I see some consternation on a few faces here. No? Okay. We keep going. Anybody, any thoughts, any reactions? Oh, there we go. Rebecca.
This is just an aside. I just love doing this. And I did a Torah study yesterday. And it was noted that Dinah is missing.
Yes. Yes. I mean, if we had a nickel for every time that, a daughter or a wife or a sister or a mother is missing from the story, we'd all be retired. Look, it is, I think we all know, because we're all pros here. It's the weakness of the text and the weakness of the tradition that, and Judaism is not alone. The Torah is not alone, right? That it is a male-centric narrative for sure. Okay, we'll go. Okay, just making sure I'm not missing anybody.
Rabbi, maybe that needs to change in continual writings of the Holy Word.
That's a great point. I would say that in ways large and small, it has started to change. Right now, boy, 15 years ago, maybe something like that. The Reform Movement published a Women's Torah commentary, which is a phenomenal work for those who aren't familiar with it. I actually think the name is limiting to it because it's not really a women's Torah commentary. It just seeks to also explore what the women in the story, who they were, and what a woman's experience would have been through this. And so I think there definitely is an attempt to do that. I recently read in the last week, which I'm fascinated by, an attempt to create a Hebrew grammatical gender neutral form, right? Hebrew is a gendered language like many languages, which makes things harder. And I recently read, I'll find it and share it because I don't have more detail to share than this, but an attempt to actually, in the Hebrew, create a non-gendered version of the text, which I think is curious, but we'll go there. Okay, I saw
Is that
something.
is that the new interpretation that the CCR is working on?
I don't believe so.
Oh, okay, because the CCR is working on one that is they're trying to make it a direct translation, and they're planned to pilot Genesis in the fall. And it hopefully it will be a translation that everyone or everything can fit into it and interpret it with what it should be, or including everything today, yesterday, and tomorrow. That's the best way I can. That's the best way I can explain it
I'll have
right
to do
now.
a little more. I'll have to do a little more digging into that, because that sounds very interesting to me. I think it raises an inherent challenge, which is that there is no such thing as a direct or literal translation of anything. There just isn't, right? Every single translation of anything involves interpretation, involves decisions from the editor or the redactor or the translator as to, I'm going to choose to use this English word, not this English, what have you, right? Right. The Reform movement, I know, went through this, painstakingly 20 years ago, when it came to translations for the most recent prayer book, and then Moxar, right? How do we create what we call a faithful translation, which is close to the spirit, right? But there's no such thing. So I think that any attempt to create or call something a direct or literal translation can be a bit fraught. And then in that same space, without getting, on a whole other tangent, because Hebrew is a gendered language, does a direct translation reflect the gendered nature of, let's say, a name for God? Does that mean that Shekhinah means that God is feminine? No, I would say, right?
My mother-in-law brought from Czechoslovakia in the beginning of 1930s, a woman machzor in Yiddish. And it was like, yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Do you have a copy?
So if we're offering opinion, may I offer my opinion?
Why not? 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There's 20, there's 19 of us here, so we should have at least 50 opinions.
Oh, that's right, exactly. Why should we be any different today than any other day, right? But to say this, in my humble opinion, I think we started at the point of when it was written, so we'll accept that as the beginning, even though we don't know what the beginning really is, okay? But it, as for me, is in most things that have happened in our life and moving very quickly, I think we have an opportunity to embrace everything and make choices of what individually we wish to embrace. In other words, why change everything except for rewriting for it to be offered for those who wish to embrace another? But we must not change what is original to fit what is going on. And if you understand what I'm trying to say.
I do.
You don't have to agree.
No, I happen to agree. I'll say something that maybe at the risk of offending anyone who's here or anyone who's watching on Facebook or YouTube now or later. I'm sure I'll get emails and comments about this being insensitive and not woke or what have you. But the example I think of most easily is High Holy Day liturgy of Avinu Malkeinu, right? Of which there are now, I don't know, half a dozen different Hebrew versions of it, trying to escape the words Avinu, father, Malkeinu, king. And I've always, taught and said to folks that I understand people who, whether it's because of the gender or whether because it's just the motif of a father and a king that's problematic, of wanting something, of not agreeing with that. But I think that is the reflection of a very simplistic and frankly literal reading of the text itself, which is metaphor. If we talk about the original intent, I don't believe the original intent was that God was a father or a king. Those are metaphors made to help us grasp, comprehend, that which is greater than we, right? I mean, if you look at all the different metaphors and such that are used, for God throughout prayer books, the High Holy Day prayer books, Talmud, the Torah, certainly, there's dozens, hundreds, and many of them are in conflict with one another, right? Because it's metaphor. And I think that, to your point, Karen, from my opinion, changing that or rewriting it to be something else.
Dilute history for what reason?
Right.
I mean, there are plenty of problems in the Constitution, but we don't rewrite it to say, it says all men are created equal. We don't rewrite it to say all people.
Right.
Even though that's what we mean and what we believe. So I think, it's certainly not a question that's germane only to Torah and to Judaism, right? It's to anything ancient. And I'll just say what everyone here, I think, and then I see Rebecca's hand and Gary's, everyone here has heard me say umpteen times, which is right or wrong. I'm a big believer in, looking at a text as a product of the time in which it was written.
Exactly.
As a product of the people and the community that wrote it and the world in which it came from.
Right.
Fully understanding that that's not the world we live in. Values may be different, norms may be different, ethics, morals may be different. But to look at a 2,000-year-old text through a 21st century lens, personally, it is a road to nowhere.
And frankly, what you're saying is, if you pardon me for interjecting, on your point is, I think instead of our showing that we're moving on, we're really regressing by closing off when we do that, if you can follow my point.
Yeah, I mean, again, I because to me, if you look at it through a 21st century lens, then it's very easy to dismiss X, Y, and Z because it doesn't fit with our, contemporary norms. Well, great. Then the conversation's over.
That's right. It's the closing of the American
and we're not
mind.
reading Torah anymore.
Remember how?
And we're not going to read Torah anymore. But if we start with the
message,
the principle that we believe that Torah has value and is worth studying year after year after year, week after week after week, then I think it's frankly lazy to dismiss it as chauvinistic, as small, close-minded, as what have you. And the real fruitful, interesting, opportunity to engage, which we're all proof of because we're doing it, this week and every week, is to look at it, through the lens from which it came, and then see what meaning we can draw out of it. And then how can we take that meaning and transport that to our 21st century, experience.
May I ask a question,
yeah.
Rabbi?
Go ahead, Nona.
That being said, about the 21st century lens and women and inheritance and the firstborn being a girl, not a boy, is there a way that the reform movement that we can change things to where girls get their inheritance and their dowries?
So I'm going to say, so great question. And we don't have to, and Gary, Rebecca, I promise we're going to get to you. We don't have to because, right, as many of us may remember, and we've talked about it before, I think, right, there's the wonderful story of the daughters of Zelophehad, right, whose father, Zelophehad, who we know little about, right, dies. He has no sons. He only has daughters. Who would not stand based on biblical law to inherit any of his property, land, wealth, what have you. And his daughters go to the tent of meeting, they go to Moses, they go to the elders, and they say, basically, this isn't right. Our father's legacy should not disappear simply because he had no sons. We should be able to inherit this. And God, takes their case, Moses takes their case to God, and God says, they're right. Change the law, change the rule. and goes so far as to say it shouldn't just be an inheritance, it should be a ancestral inheritance, meaning that it's not just theirs, that they can bequeath it on to their heirs, the way anybody else could or might, right? So I think that and it changes, right? But that, the point being, that is of such note because it's so out of character for Torah. Okay, Gary, and then Rebecca, you guys have been so patient.
I was going to say that in the changing world of Reform Judaism, I mean, the last 20, 25 years or so, we've headed much more to a woman-driven rabbinic world. I mean, there's many, many, many more women rabbis, and the interpretations are being adjusted for that. But I also live in a dual world where my partner is a conservative Jew. We worship at a conservative synagogue, and
how dare you?
I know, I remember Wosher. And we had the discussion recently
about an interfaith marriage,
about grandchildren. Well, interfaith marriage too, but grandchildren, some of which are in the Reform movement and are paternally Jewish, right? And others in the conservative movement whose mothers are not Jewish and are going to the mikveh. And what the pros and cons of these changes impact. I guess the question would be, how do these impact lives 30 years from now, 40 years from now? We don't know yet, but and how does text deal with that?
Oh, thanks for a simple question.
Well, I never speak up in these.
I was going to say that's only about 6 questions there until one. So yeah, let's talk about intermarriage, patrilineal descent, the role of women in the rabbinate, and whatever else you raised. But no, it's very true, right? I mean, I think we lose sight of this, particularly in the Reform and to a certain extent conservative world. We live in a world in which the overwhelming majority of people who are ordained as rabbi, at least in the Reform movement, are women. It's not even close. Not even close. And I'm no longer a youngin, but 15 years ago, my class was 75% female.
Wow.
And that was a lot for them. That was the largest ever. And the pendulum moves, but it is always more than 50% female.
Wow.
Always. And but what I think is interesting to think about is that is in a world in which 50 years ago there were no women rabbis.
Right.
Not that long, right? Right. Our good friend and teacher, Karen Fox, our Rabbi Emerita, right? The third woman ever ordained as a rabbi. Laura Geller, who we just talked about, the second woman ever ordained as a rabbi, right? And they're not old and they're not going anywhere, right? And so that is a dramatic transformation of Jewish life. That's the reason, one reason, I think, Gary, to your point of lots of modern and contemporary scholarship around including women's voices in the tradition and text, which is hugely important, right? Because otherwise it's half the story. And what a gift that we're living in a time in which, frankly, in which we don't think twice about it, at least in our part of the Jewish world. I don't know about others. I mean, we don't think twice about it. I do think just because it's something that I actually think about a fair amount, Gary. So I'm going to jump on it, even though it's not really part of Torah today. But you're right. You raised the issue of patrilineal descent and the challenges between the Reform movement recognizing that and the rest of the Jewish world not. And then I don't know if you meant it to be related, but I think it is related. The idea of not really being able to think through the way decisions we make today affect Judaism, 30, 40 years from now. personally, I think we're currently living through that when it comes to patrilineal descent, which I think it was the right decision, right? The reform movement decided in the early 80s to recognize patrilineal descent, which, without getting into too much detail, just a very quick down and dirty history lesson, was actually not new. Look at the Torah. The Torah is patrilineal descent. No one cares who your mother was, right? It gets switched to matrilineal descent in the Middle Ages. And then the reform movement comes back in the 1980s and says, look, we live in a world in which you know who your father is. And, father's lineage should be just as valid as a mother's. And so, this is the part people miss. And so, if a child is raised Jewish, in a Jewish home, educated Jewishly, participates in the ritual life cycles of Jewish upbringing, a bris, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, confirmation, what have you, then they're Jewish. Incidentally, it also says the same thing for kids whose mothers are Jewish, that they need to go through those same rituals. It actually, in a way, raises the bar of being able to call yourself Jewish. The point being, that was 40 years ago, which means that we're just now, I encounter the children of that decision are now grown-ups, and they're getting married, and the ramifications of that are playing out, right? I had a young woman come sit in my office, I don't know how long ago, who grew up at the temple, went to nursery school, went to religious school, bat mitzvah, camp, conference, the whole thing, right? Her mother's not Jewish, and she fell in love with this lovely guy. I don't even think they were engaged yet. He came from a more traditional family. And they were sitting on the living room floor in their apartment one day, and he just kind of looked at her and matter-of-factly said, wait a minute, so aren't you not really Jewish? And she said, what do you mean? And then came to ask me about it, right? I don't think that was in consequence that anybody could have thought of, to your point, Gary, 35, 40 years ago. Doesn't mean that, we shouldn't be making the decisions that we think are right. But I think that there's absolutely unintended, or I shouldn't say unintended. There are, the way it plays out, it can't be, often imagined, at the onset. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Brad, and then Rebecca.
Rabbi, there's something rattling around in my head about this issue of descent, that you look to the grandchildren to determine whether one is Jewish or not. And in that context, there's a reference to these two, Manasseh and Ephraim. Does that ring a bell at all?
It does not.
Is in
the looking to the grandchildren, say more about that. I've never heard that. In what context?
I think this may be an orthodoxy. I think Rabbi David's brought this up recently.
Well, I'll bug him about it. But just so I'm clear, the idea being that you look at someone's grandchildren to determine
whether you are Jewish.
Oh. What if you don't live long enough to have grandchildren?
No, God forbid.
God forbid. But that's interesting. No, I've never heard that. The only thing remotely close to that to me just is this idea of just Jewish identity, survival, perpetuity, which is that, at the end of the day, if we want to judge the success of any part of this enterprise, it's, will our grandchildren still be Jewish, right? And Rabbi Leader talks a lot about living as a good ancestor, right? That we don't think of ourselves as ancestors, but we are. And so one could make the argument, I don't know if this is what Stan was alluding to, but that for us, if we live as good Jewish ancestors, then that certainly increases the likelihood that our children, grandchildren, and God forbid, great-grandchildren, are also Jewish, whatever that means. To Gary's point, whatever that's going to mean in 40 years or 60 years or 80 years.
Read what the Pew Charitable Trust says.
Yes.
And we are not.
Yeah. There's no shortage of depressing statistics to read. They're also positive and uplifting ones. Okay, Rebecca, you've been so patient, and then I'm going to take one more, and then we got to pretty much wrap up here.
I agree with everything that you said, and I think everything that you said is very important for all of us to hear. I want to apologize for leading us down this rabbit hole.
Not at all. No such thing as a rabbit hole.
And then I think Rabbi Stanley's comment was in reference to what's called right to return, right?
Yes,
return,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, right. That's and then we're going to end here with Rabbi Peretz. But yes, right. So when it comes to right of return, so it's the opposite, Brad. You can exercise the right of return to emigrate to Israel if you had one Jewish grandparent.
That's exciting.
No, I thought it was in context with Manasseh and Ephraim and the blessing that is said over them.
Okay.
You've inspired me, Brad. I'm going to call Stan from the car after this, and I will send you an email.
I agree with Rebecca. He said it in the current events class about the new government are trying to change it.
Okay, they're trying to change what specifically?
To make it stricter on the law of return, that it's not
Well,
just
they were
one
also,
grandparent.
it was also in reference, I think, to convert, if you had converted or not. I think there was a piece of that as to how you would be labeled, so to speak, in Israel, should you make Aliyah to Israel.
It's, I'll lay my cards on the table. I think this all falls into the category of the who is a Jew question.
Right.
May I just interject about in Prague when we were there? I remember this maybe 15 or 20 years ago. They said that when times were good in the area and Gentiles wanted to convert to Judaism. And then the story goes that when times were bad, they wanted to leave and go back. So think about it. I'm not judging.
Look, it's interesting. I think, and because you mentioned the Pew studies, that I always think the who is a Jew question thing is kind of almost funny in a way, because like we need to make it harder to identify as Jewish, right? Or to be Jewish. Because all of these studies, by the way, they're all based on, in essence, self-selecting honor system. They call you on the phone, and if you say you're Jewish, you count. That's it, right? National Jewish Population Survey, Pew, all of them, right? They, if you say yes, I'm Jewish, they take your word for it, and you count in the data.
And so then, if you want to play the religious card, then you can say that's why we make it more difficult when people want to convert, to make sure we ask them 3 times so we know how sincere.
Well, a topic for another day. Some of you know here, right? I oversee our Choosing Judaism conversion program, which takes the opposite by and large, right? Opposite perspective, which is that we ought to be in the business of welcoming people. Not that we ought not to have standards, but
we thank you, Jeff. We thank you both for all your time and efforts.
Okay, so we could go on all afternoon, but we're not going to. I want to end with Rabbi Beau Shapiro, who's a wonderful, wonderful local teacher, was one of the rabbis at Keilat Israel for a long time. And Cheryl says, so what was so important for them to hear? Meaning, Jacob's, son and grandchildren. The criticism, their past mistakes, or perhaps what Jacob wanted them to hear was that despite the challenges they faced and the consequences of their actions, each was still a part of the family, still welcome at his side. Furthermore, he wants them to know that each of them would be a part of the new nation in formation. The past was not forgotten. Rather, it had become a part of who they were and where they stood. Regardless of what they had done in the past, they would remain part of the covenanted people and would continue to carry with them their strengths, their weaknesses, their experiences, and their witnesses. Jacob's blunt honesty is at once his own acceptance of each one and his vision of their future place in the ongoing destiny of our people. Then, and only then, could Jacob find the words to bless each one of them with the blessing they needed. Then and only then could Jacob find the peace to face his creator.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Just a little food for thought as we make our way into Shabbat. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Thanks for making a
Shalom.
little bit of time for Torah. And
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank
Beautiful
you.
weekend,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Happy New Year
Everybody be
also.
well.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
See you on live stream tonight.
Oh.